August 12, 1944. Merseburg, Germany. 1340 hours. Hauptmann Hans Hartmann, 29. Flew Messerschmitt Bf-109G at 28,000 feet, positioning to attack B-17 bomber formation. His squadron climbed steadily, speed dropping as altitude increased. Standard intercept procedure: climb to bomber altitude, attack, dive away before escorts engage. But today something changed. American P-51 Mustangs escorting the bombers didn't lose speed at altitude like they had in previous encounters. Instead, they accelerated. At 30,000 feet, climbing, Hartmann's Bf-109G could barely maintain 350 miles per hour at this altitude. The Mustangs approaching him appeared to be flying 420, maybe 430 miles per hour. At 30,000 feet, in a climb, this violated everything Hartmann understood about aircraft performance. All engines lost power at altitude. Thin air meant less oxygen for combustion, reducing power output. Performance degraded predictably. But these Mustangs weren't degrading. They were performing better at extreme altitude than they had at 20,000 feet months earlier. The reason was invisible. Fuel. Not the aircraft. Not the engine design, just fuel. But fuel of grade German aviation industry couldn't produce. 150 octane. And it turned P-51 Mustangs into high-altitude demons the Luftwaffe couldn't match. By August 1944, the air war over Germany had shifted decisively against the Luftwaffe. American fighters dominated daylight skies. German fighter pilots survived through caution, choosing engagements carefully, avoiding situations where American advantages in numbers and coordination became overwhelming. But even careful pilots couldn't avoid all combat, and when combat occurred, German pilots increasingly noticed American fighters performing beyond their known capabilities. Aircraft performance depends fundamentally on engine power. Piston engines burn fuel mixed with air, creating combustion that drives pistons. The octane rating measures fuel's resistance to premature ignition under compression. Higher octane fuel allows higher compression ratios and more aggressive engine tuning without engine damage. More compression means more power from the same displacement. In 1944, standard aviation fuel was 100 octane or 115 octane for both Allied and German aircraft. At these octane levels, engines were tuned conservatively to prevent damage. Pilots could use emergency power settings briefly, but sustained high power risked engine failure. This created performance ceiling limited by fuel chemistry, rather than engine design. American chemical industry developed 150 octane fuel in 1944. Through advanced refining processes and chemical additives, Britain developed similar 150 grade fuel independently. Production was limited initially but expanded rapidly through 1944. By summer, sufficient quantities allowed operational use in fighters escorting bombers to Germany. The Packard Merlin V1650 engine-powering P-51 Mustangs was designed with conservative power settings for 100 octane fuel. Maximum power was 1,490 horsepower at military power setting. With 150 octane fuel, the same engine could be tuned to produce 1,720 horsepower without reliability problems. That 230 additional horsepower transformed Mustang performance, especially at high altitude where every bit of power mattered. Speed increased from 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet with 100 octane fuel to 455 miles per hour with 150 octane. More significantly, at 30,000 feet where most bomber escort occurred, speed increased from approximately 400 miles per hour to 430 miles per hour. Rate of climb improved by 500 feet per minute. Ceiling increased from 41,000 feet to 43,000 feet. Combat range extended by 50 miles. These improvements seem modest in absolute terms, 15 to 30 miles per hour, 500 feet per minute. But in air combat, marginal advantages compound. The faster fighter controls engagement, choosing when to attack and when to disengage. The faster climbing fighter achieves altitude advantage. The higher ceiling fighter dominates from above. Every small advantage multiplies in combat. For Luftwaffe pilots, the change was bewildering. The P-51 Mustang was already a formidable opponent with 100-octane fuel. German pilots respected its range, speed, and handling. But German fighters had specific performance advantages they could exploit. The Bf-109G could outclimb the Mustang initially. The FW-190D could match the Mustang in speed at medium altitude. German pilots learned to use these advantages, avoiding fights where Mustangs held advantage. But with 150-octane fuel, the P-51's performance improved enough that German advantages disappeared or reversed. Bf-109G could no longer outclimb Mustangs reliably. FW-190D couldn't match Mustang speed at high altitude. German pilots found themselves consistently at performance disadvantage. This forced even more defensive tactics, attacking only when overwhelming numerical advantage existed. Luftwaffe intelligence struggled to explain American fighter performance improvements. Initial reports suggested new Mustang variant with upgraded engines. Captured Mustangs were examined. Engines appeared identical to earlier models. Intelligence officers were confused. How could the same engine produce more power? The answer came from a captured American pilot in September 1944. During interrogation, he mentioned that his squadron had recently transitioned to 150-grade fuel, which provided better high-altitude performance. German intelligence officers requested clarification. The pilot explained that American fighters were now using higher octane fuel, allowing higher engine settings without damage. German aviation fuel industry understood the implication immediately. Producing 150-octane fuel required advanced refining capacity and chemical additives Germany lacked. German aviation fuel production focused on maximizing volume rather than optimizing octane. Synthetic fuel from coal provided adequate octane for existing engines, but couldn't be upgraded to 150 octane economically. Even natural petroleum sources available to Germany couldn't be refined to 150 octane with available technology. Luftwaffe Technical Intelligence report dated October 1944 analyzed the 150 octane fuel issue with stark conclusions. American and British forces now operate fighters using 150 octane aviation fuel, allowing significant power increase without engine modification. Our investigation confirms we lack industrial capacity to produce comparable fuel with current resources and technology. Achieving 150 octane production would require new refineries, chemical plants, and raw materials we cannot obtain under current blockade conditions. Our aircraft engines are designed for 87 to 100 octane fuel and cannot exploit higher octane without complete redesign. Even if we secured 150 octane fuel, our engines couldn't use it effectively without modifications requiring months of development and testing. The report recommended accepting that American fighters would maintain fuel-derived performance advantage for foreseeable future. German tactics must compensate through better positioning, numerical concentration, and avoiding extended combat where American performance advantages compounded. But compensating through tactics has limits when performance disparity is significant. Experienced pilots could mitigate disadvantages through skill and experience. But by late 1944, experienced Luftwaffe pilots were increasingly scarce. Replacement pilots with minimal training faced American pilots with both experience and superior aircraft performance. The combination was deadly. Lieutenant Friedrich Müller, assigned to JG-27 in September 1944 with 120 hours total flight time, described his first combat encounter in post-war interview conducted in 1987. I was warned American Mustangs were dangerous. I expected them to be faster than my Bf-109, but I didn't expect to be completely outmatched. I attempted to climb away from attacking Mustangs using standard defensive maneuver. They followed me, climbing faster than I could. At 30,000 feet, I pushed to maximum power, hoping to extend away. They closed distance effortlessly. My instructor said Bf-109 was best climbing fighter in service. Perhaps it was years earlier. By 1944, Mustangs climbed better, flew faster, and pilots had far more experience. I survived that engagement only because a more experienced wingman intervened. Many of my training classmates didn't survive their first week. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe pilots was corrosive. Fighter pilots depend on confidence in their equipment. When pilots believe their aircraft can perform comparably to enemy aircraft, they fight with determination. When pilots believe they're at permanent disadvantage, morale suffers regardless of courage or determination. By late 1944, Luftwaffe pilots understood they flew inferior aircraft powered by inferior fuel against better-trained opponents with superior numbers. Some pilots still achieved success through exceptional skill or favorable circumstances. But average pilots facing average circumstances had minimal survival chances. This reality made fighter pilot recruitment increasingly difficult. The 150 octane fuel advantage wasn't secret. German intelligence understood it clearly. German aviation industry couldn't replicate it. This created the worst kind of disadvantage. Knowing opponent's advantage without capability to counter it creates helplessness. If German engineers didn't know why American fighters performed better, they could hope to discover and counter it. But knowing the reason and being unable to address it removed hope. Post-war analysis revealed the industrial disparity underlying fuel octane gap. United States produced approximately 90 million barrels of 100-octane aviation fuel during World War II. Germany produced approximately 8 million barrels of 87 to 100-octane fuel. Not only did America produce more fuel absolutely, American fuel was higher quality. The production ratio of roughly 10 to 1 in quantity, combined with quality advantage, meant German aviation operated under fuel constraints that limited operational tempo and aircraft performance. Simultaneously, the 150-octane fuel development demonstrated American industrial chemistry capabilities. Producing high-octane fuel required advanced catalytic cracking, alkylation processes, and chemical additives. These weren't simply scaled-up versions of standard refining. They required fundamental chemical engineering advances and significant capital investment in specialized facilities. American petroleum industry made these investments before and during the war. German industry, focused on synthetic fuel from coal, lacked both expertise and capacity for advanced octane upgrading. Today, aviation fuel octane is less relevant because jet engines replaced piston engines in military aviation. But the principle remains valid. Fuel quality affects performance. Advanced fuel formulations enable higher engine performance. Nations with superior chemical industry capability can create advantages through fuel formulation that opponents with less developed chemical industry cannot easily match. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, a P-51 Mustang is displayed with information explaining the 150-octane fuel advantage. The placard notes that same aircraft with 100-octane fuel was formidable. With 150-octane fuel, it was dominant. The difference wasn't visible. Pilots couldn't see fuel octane, but they could feel it in engine power and aircraft performance. And German pilots felt it as closing distance they couldn't escape and climb rates they couldn't match. A museum visitor comment from 2018, written by a retired Air Force pilot, captured the significance well. I flew jets that went Mach 2, but the basic principle my Mustang flying grandfather understood still applied. Power matters. The aircraft with more power has more options. 150-octane fuel gave Mustang pilots power advantage German pilots couldn't match. In aerial combat, having more options than your opponent often means you survive and they don't. 30 years of extra power made that difference for thousands of pilots on both sides. The lesson extends beyond aviation. Technology advantages often derive not from visible differences, but from supporting capabilities. The P-51 Mustang didn't look different with 150-octane fuel. The engine wasn't visibly modified, but the invisible chemical difference in fuel transformed performance. Organizations competing technically must consider entire capability chain, not just end products. American Mustangs were better partly because American chemical industry was better. That industrial capability advantage was invisible in aerial combat, but decisive in outcomes. German pilots were skilled, determined, fighting for survival of their nation. But they flew aircraft limited by fuel their nation couldn't produce. Skill has limits when opposed by skill, plus superior equipment enabled by superior industrial capacity. By late 1944, German fighter pilots understood this bitterly. They fought on because they had no choice, but they fought knowing each engagement might be their last against opponents with advantages they couldn't overcome through courage or skill alone. 150 octane. Just a number, but that number represented chemical industry capability, industrial investment, and technological advantage that gave American fighters performance German fighters couldn't match. Sometimes wars are won by invisible advantages, the kind you can't see until it's too late to counter them. In 1944, German pilots saw American fighters performing impossibly well. What they couldn't see was the fuel. By the time they understood, nothing could be done. The chemical industry gap was too large, the time too short, the war too far gone.